may not have noticed, but I actually showed the same footage from a specific Def Leppard music video twice there. That was an accident on my part, but I kept it in the edit to prove my point.
These guys have been selling out stadiums all over America. This is their first U.S. television performance. Put your hands together for The Cure.
Somewhere here I've got a list of dates. The Pixies are touring from the 27th. They go from Nottingham, Birmingham, London, Bristol, Manchester, Northampton. They've already added another date in London because they sold out the first.
Now here's Sonic Youth with their manager Don Fleming on keyboards. The song is Silver Rocket.
Shit, I'm jumping ahead. Can we get a rewind, please? Right. Welcome to my view of 80s rock music. Before I got educated, growing up as a teenager, my attraction to 20th century music stemmed from the classic rock era of the late 60s and 70s, then skipping the 80s altogether and really developing a deep love for all the outcast and eccentric rock sounds of the 90s. That translates to basically weirdo shit like this. And though I finally got there in the end, I'm not entirely sure at first what it was about the period connecting these two decades that acted as a turn back at once sign for me. But for the longest time, I wasn't compelled to look further, to lift the rug up and have a real poke underneath. Then I realised that the biggest part of this was the mainstream content of 80s rock being so oversaturated with hair metal and glam rock, and my unbelievable ignorance that there wouldn't be much more than that. The kind of overproduced, very of-its-time music that doesn't exactly do a whole lot to maintain and reinforce what makes rock as a genre so exciting, so thrilling, at least to me anyway. Perhaps I'm laying it on slightly too thick here, but it's difficult to think of groups like Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi, two of the real flagship bands of the 80s, as having the essence of the genre they were tagged onto when putting them in the same breadth as some of their more interesting, flavourful and braver contemporaries.
Nothing in particular.
Should we roll it, Jimmy? We're rolling on one.
I won't pretend for one second that rock hasn't evolved and transitioned much since the days of the Kinks and the Animals, and the commercial chapter I've touched on in the 80s certainly gives the overarching story some character, some personality, but between all of the tightly polished production design, the leathery tacky aesthetic, and God, the countless power ballads. I can't tell you, baby, what went. Actually, the more I think about it, this particular scene that the United States propagated might be one of the worst things they've done. In fact, on the US atrocity tier list, I'd probably put it above the Vietnam War and just a tad below slavery. Yep, there you go. Thankfully, there was something growing and festering elsewhere and really scratching an itch for both the alternative music scene at the time and myself over 30 years later. My entry into the 80s alternative scene as an adolescent was undoubtedly through my dad, who was and is still really into a lot of the gothic alt-rock bands from that period. The key ones to mention are Sushi and the Banshees, the Sisters of Mercy and Christian Death. Not to mention The Cure, which, if you looked at the thumbnail of this video before clicking on it, you'll know they're going to be a substantial part of it. As someone who at some point lost what felt like at the time would be a lifelong interest in playing guitar, and then fell back in love with the instrument as a teenager due to outfits like Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins, it felt right to discover who their inspirational predecessors were and also some of the other great music happening around that time too. Like I said, my dad's taste served as a strong launchpad, and from there the world was my oyster really. Personally, there are 3 standout albums, 3 absolute pinnacles of alternative rock at the back end of the 80s that are must-listens. If you love the genre, if you love its history, and if you love what gives it life. I think for some of you, you'll know these will predictably be Disintegration by The Cure, Doolittle by the Pixies, and Daydream Nation by Sonic Youth. In a lot of ways, Disintegration is really the outlier of the pack when considering the relative popularity the album had on its release and the lack of a rough, excessively hostile texture that the other 2 albums have in abundance. It really is an ambitious undertaking, coming in at over 17 minutes, whose blueprints were born from the band's previous album, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, which was The Cure's first double LP. The success of that album would have given the band the confidence to release more work in a similar vein lengthwise. Disintegration certainly reaped its just rewards, with it being a fruitful peak in The Cure's career that wasn't replicated, and when you listen to the album, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. It definitely has this magnum opus swagger about it and has the compositional scope to back it. It knows what it is. It's something you get hit with nearly instantly on the album opener, Plainsong. It begins with these nice chimes that ring delicately in your ears, making you wonder what's coming next. And it is hard to prepare yourself for what does come next when the song really kicks into gear. Even saying kicks into gear doesn't really do it justice. It gets galvanised into life. The chimes blast into the stratosphere together with this sonic boom of synths, drums, bass. It's a spectacle of an entrance to the album, it really is. If you don't listen to The Cure, you'll probably know Plainsong best from the 2015 film Ant-Man, where it gets used very creatively like this.
I'm gonna disintegrate you!
Playing Disintegration by The Cure.
Both Plainsong and most of the songs that come after have a cinematic quality to them, actually. They're larger-than-life, film score-worthy, really. Some songs have the low end pushed right to the max, and it feels like your fucking head can't deal with the vibration and is about to become detached from the rest of your body. It's not a joke. But there are also some simpler, more direct songs on the album. One of the quintessential rock love songs of the 80s is on here in the form of Love Song, the 4th track on Disintegration. Speaking of love, I fucking love the solemn organ part on this one. It's so The Cure, it's such a vibe, it's so low-key in how somber it is. It captures the mood of the song perfectly, in fact it makes the mood. In contrast to the many prolonged tracks on the album, I appreciate how curt Love Song is. It's straight to the point, blunt, especially in Smith's lyrics. While the organ really gives the song a feeling as though something's died, the lyrics are poignant enough to show quite evidently how that isn't quite the case. Sometimes you just gotta say what's on your mind, don't beat around the bush, and he fully commits to this on the song with the despair in his delivery in a way that is drippy to some degree, sure. Okay, to a lot of degree. But he makes up for it in just how relatable he is. I think anyone that has felt love, who knows how it fucks with your brain chemistry and treats your hormones like play toys, will be able to find something here. Smith's vocals and lyrics do lead me to see how a common complaint, especially in the year 2024, could be around how cheesy The Cure's sound is at times on this album. I know my dad really didn't connect with it when he first heard it as a 19-year-old, and he hasn't really changed his stance in that time. I don't think he's even listened to it in over 20 years and doesn't feel compelled to. He's someone who gravitates way more to the unelaborate post-punk endeavours on their early LPs like 17 Seconds or the apocalyptic Pornography. Which, as a big fan of early Cure, I understand completely. My gateway into loving the band when I was younger was through those early records. However, on Disintegration, I do think the band gets around the cheese by Smith being really sincere, the sound being original and retaining a lot of the melancholy the Cure are famous for, with all these other sublime instrumental elements that light a spellbinding fire under the musical cauldron in which the songs are cooking in. They just have too many other aspects about them that are too enjoyable to ignore. The special ones being the title track, Disintegration, which is probably a contender along with Fascination Street as my favourite song on the whole album. There is very little on this song that could be perceived as remotely mushy. It's post-punk at its finest, with a dazzle of that dreamy magic the album has shown a lot of up to this point. A key part of this tune that always jumps out to me when I'm listening to it is how the hi-hat is mainly responsible with keeping the momentum up, keeping it going. And it's like at some point in the song it develops this very trippy, jittering shadow it can't appear to escape, even though at times it's temporarily working. It's like... Wait, what the fuck am I doing? I can literally show you. Some kind of guitar or keyboard part with maybe a tremolo effect on it that also shares the burden of keeping the flow up alongside the hi-hat. Speaking generally here, Disintegration is one of the first examples of a song that comes to mind for me that's both long but has a structure that consists of leaning quite a bit on one particular passage of music. Yeah, synths and keys come and go, sure, but it pretty much sustains a constant snippet of music from start to end for about 8 minutes. It just goes to show how little of an issue this can be when what you're listening to, no matter how often it repeats and cycles back into itself, finds a way of remaining as much of a hook as it was from the first bar and doesn't get stale. You find it effortless to get sucked in and stay sucked in. My only real issue with this song is considering it's called Disintegration and considering how much it rocks, I wish it had been the album closer. It certainly betters the actual closer, Untitled, which I think is a bit of a weak finale to the album in the grand scheme of things. Plainsong, Love Song and Disintegration are certainly highlights from the record, but it has its fair share of other peaks and minimal troughs, where each extract from the album serves better as a collective experience rather than as separate pieces. Listening to the whole thing is like being on a ship delicately gliding across the night sky with a full moon in the backdrop, and over some of the journey you're enveloped in this thick, cloudy mist that shrouds you almost palpably, and during other parts of the journey it's a clear sky with a shower of shooting stars falling to earth all around you. I know I'm probably being a bit too flowery there, but when the music is so vivid to the listener, the language describing it has to be just as potent to really get across the strong identity the album has. It's so easy to be submerged by the wave of pillowy synths, fluttering faraway guitar parts, blaring bass lines and Smith's iconic, haunting vocal style, to the point where you forget a sense of time and space and you only become fully aware of it again once it's all come crashing to an end. The album's grip can be found in its ability to feel very well realised, focused and consistent, which is something I think The Cure struggled a bit more with on Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. It seems like they learned a lot about some of the shortcomings on that album in how scattered it can be and the difficulty it has with knowing what it wants to put out there to the listener. Don't get me wrong, it's still a worthwhile album to listen to, but for me you can't beat the persistent voyage Disintegration puts you on across all of its acts. Even if the album might be a bit closer to what you think of when it comes to the 80s, as it's very much a product of the sentimentality you would see in music around that time. Whether this is a gift or a curse, it will always struggle to detach itself and come unstuck from the era that produced it, much like many of the other artists from that slice of history. It could be said, I suppose, that this, Doolittle and Daydream Nation are all albums that symbolise the 80s, in the way that everything musically that has ever been represents a natural, continuous and very responsive evolution of what came before it. and where you land in the timeline tends to be inseparably glued to your identity and how things were supposed to be, I guess. As fresh and timeless as you can aim to be, you can't help but be fastly tied down, especially if you're influencing the musical landscape around you, and the far-reaching ripples that accompany the sea change stretch on for years to come. And I think this is why I find Doolittle specifically is the album that has aged the best of these three. It goes that extra mile further than something like Fleetwood Mac's Rumours does, a soft rock masterpiece from 1977 that puts the fucking T in timeless. Anyone can listen to Rumours today and for the next 100 years and have a great time. It's so approachable and inviting. But having said that, you can't escape the 70s whimsy, charm and attitude bleeding all over it. I won't pretend that the Pixies' music is as accessible as Fleetwood Mac's, but I do wholeheartedly believe the Pixies don't broadly suffer from the same limitations, for lack of a better word. It's difficult to pinpoint and rationalise exactly what it is that leads to that uber-cool timelessness Doolittle has. It might be some of the surreal themes, it might be an abject, very deliberate refusal to use synths and other common 80s music tropes, quite defiantly so too. It might be that albums like Doolittle and some of R.E.M's equally enduring 80s work really helped pave the way for that astronomical rock boom that happened in the early 90s as a result of Nevermind's well-documented overnight success story. Kurt did famously even say with Smells Like Teen Spirit he was trying to make a song that sounded like one the Pixies might have written. It also could be the sheer number of indie bands today that have their roots and influences in 80s underground rock, and Doolittle's really, what I believe to be, modern tone and progressive sensibility taps into that quite well. Look, whatever it is, it comes back to just how much it's distinct as being irresistibly ageless. I've been listening to this album since I was 15, 16, and it still feels like it's in its infancy today to me. The freshness, the lack of cliche, some of the off-kilter experimentation, the never-ending immediate enjoyment it delivers. It doesn't have the makeup of something that came out in the year 1989. I'm fully aware I wasn't there to observe in microscopic detail the various pushes and pulls and whatnot. I'm not a music historian. My understanding of the medium's progression and rich diverse past in the 20th century is quite shallow and basic, but I have listened to enough to be sure. I digress. The Pixies, the Pixies, the Pixies. What to say about the Pixies? They're from Boston. That's one of the more interesting facts about them. What else? To this day, the opening few lines of Monkey Gone to Heaven are still hilarious to me. There was a guy. An underwater guy who controlled the sea.
An underwater guy who controlled the sea.
Got killed by 10 million pounds of sludge from New York and New Jersey.
Got killed by 10 million pounds of sludge from New York and New Jersey.
Like, what the fuck? It goes from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. It really throws you off guard. There's also a lot of other catchy refrains plastered all over the album, from the chorus of the same song I just mentioned, to the opening passage of
Hey! Been trying to meet you. Hey, must be a devil between us, or whores in my head, whores at the door, whore in my bed, but hey.
It really shines from being so snappy lyrically, but blending that with dirty, punky instrumentation. The sense of humour Black Francis has is something, rather than someone you learn to get used to throughout Doolittle. Not just in the song lyrics, but also in his unique way of singing. It's very varied and tailored to the song's specifications quite appropriately. In the more anarchic passages of the songs, Francis tends to screech more, to howl more, to match the fiery energy of everything else going on around him. But on the stripped back, less arranged sections with the non-percussive instrumental part consisting of, say, just a bass part, you'll get something kind of serpentine, kind of sly and reined in for sure. Just look at the opening verse and gouge away your tame.
Hips like Cinderella, must be having a good shame, talking sweet about nothing, cooking up.
I don't know how someone is able to whisper with that much volume and bite and menace. It's so dynamic. Not to mention how Kim Deal functions as a backing vocalist for the Pixies on harmonies, call and response type lines, and so on and so forth. What she brings to the table is a very active but also dejected way of singing. Often the way her vocals get used to their max potential is when they're operating on a plane of existence different and higher to that of Francis, which, to say out loud, sounds fucking batshit. But if you've listened to the Pixies, it makes sense. It does. You've just got to trust me. Both Deal's bass playing and singing are a vital part of what makes this album tick. I actually think her best input in the Pixies' discography can be found on Surfer Rosa, the band's first full-length LP that was released only a year before Doolittle. A track like Gigantic, where she really takes the lead and steals the spotlight, both vocally and instrumentally, demonstrates in a fairly holistic way what she brings to the music. She can be doing a bit too much in patches on Doolittle, but I think what she does is key to the album's atmosphere. Much like Disintegration, though less epic and different in so many ways, the album certainly has an atmosphere of sorts. It's difficult to characterise what that is, but it extends past just being rock music. I suppose it's seedy, filthy, tempting you in an asexual, seductive way. And the kind of visions I have listening to it aren't far from resembling a dingy Mexican bar you might find in Red Dead Redemption. One that serves cheap liquor, one where it wouldn't take long to seek out a fight if you were after one, one with a fair share of shady, questionable individuals hanging around. There's an annoying mariachi band somewhere nearby that won't stop fucking playing. In one corner of the room there's an agitated monkey dangling off some paintings on the wall. In the other corner there's like a naked woman dancing, just vibing out. It might just be that I have Surfer Rosa's album cover stuck in my head, and if you're a guy who was of a certain age when you first saw that album cover, it will stick with you, it will. It does conjure up images listening to it quite easily, I find, and given the speed at which they recorded the entire album, taking them less than a day, makes it even more impressive. I know that the Pixies sound isn't the most meticulous or involved thing in the world, but still, taking just a day for 40 minutes of album time is unbelievable. It leads to the album being blemished. In the spirit of punk's prosperous history going back as far as the 70s when it finally became a fully formed genre and concept for what music could be, that was so rebellious, was so powerful, was so counterculture, it was all about a cheap, spoiled form of expression that anyone who had the energy to just pick up an instrument could take part in. And what came with that was a desire to be rudimentary but authentic, imperfect, and Doolittle embraces that. The Pixies go above and beyond and throw some outlandish imagery in there, a bit of surfer rock here, a bit of Spanish rock there, and wind up creating something utterly rare, very much in the vein of punk. The fact that at the time some people actually looked down on the band for making music too marketable on Doolittle is frankly ridiculous. I know Here Comes Your Man is quite poppy, but not everything has to be pure noise. But also, pure noise can sometimes be great too. Nation is what you get if you take Doolittle and mutate it uncontrollably into this hyper-aggressive, stark knot of dissonant noise rock. It doesn't compromise, it doesn't lose its volatility. It's like a glowing candle that refuses to be extinguished, that refuses to lie down. It's one hell of a beast. The one reprieve on the record comes in the form of Providence, a short-lived experimental interlude arriving succinctly over the halfway mark that takes a step back from the thundering drum grooves from Shelley and the towering, almost pulverizing electric guitar tapestries of Moore and Ronaldo. Not that one either. But even then, it's hardly a serene, relaxing tune. The tired, dusty piano part with the overbearing background hiss and recorded phone messages for Moore left to him by Mike Watt, known for being a member of bands like DOS, Firehose and Minutemen. Not that Minutemen. Providence doesn't exactly lull you into a state of comfort listening to it, is what I'm getting at. It's messy and unsettling, so despite the fact it functions as an intermission, it still fits with the album's main characteristics. Everything else is pretty consistently on the same wavelength with what surrounds it, and what a treat what surrounds it actually is. I've always marvelled at how full but equally pure Sonic Youth's tone is. It's a twisted, highly animated DIY explosion of pandemonium that to me approaches the magnitude of an orchestra at work, if orchestras could be on crack.
What is this? I don't understand. Is it modern? Salieri. You like this? It's not a question. Let me see the scene with the music.
But sire,
Oblige me.
can we see the scene with the music band?
Certainly. Certainly, Herr Director. Peter, bring the palisade back in, please.
It has the same symphonic calibre of blast radius, except warped and ugly and unrestrained. And that isn't to say Daydream Nation comes across anything remotely like an organised collection of string sections and brass and shit like that, just that it's very grand. Instruments are pushed to the limit and used incredibly resourcefully given how few actually take part in creating the music of Sonic Youth. The two guitarists in the group have a wonderful way of disguising it all, where your output is seriously larger than the input. I think it's partly down to how much feedback there is, strange phaser effects, the overdriven distortion, how much the guitars are used as weapons of mass destruction, how approximate the physical playing frequently is, and also just how fucking loud the mixes are. This track isn't on Daydream Nation, but Cinderella's big score off of the back half of Goo demonstrates that larger-than-life, orchestral bombardment of dissonant clamour. It's really a sound to behold. On Daydream Nation, however, songs like Cross the Breeze or Rain King are about as intense, sharp and extreme as the record gets. Rain King specifically has the feeling in the first 30 to 40 seconds of trying to resurrect some abhorrent demon from the depths of hell. But then even something like the rampant, practically violent guitar solo on Kissability, a personal favourite track of mine, how jagged, how shredded it is, also offers that totality that I crave from the band's style. Where Daydream Nation really shows some of the bolder touches on the record is with, I guess you could say, the daydreamy sections. It's not all conventionally structured music built on verse, chorus, verse, or whatever. There's an emphasis for more songs than you might think to have what I can only describe as a disorienting, sprawling, improvisational sounding sequence that breaks, shatters any kind of structure the song had into smithereens. Sometimes it comes in the form of a bridge section, sometimes it's the whole song, basically. The so-called trilogy that closes the album has an entry, the second, in fact, called Hyperstation. This is one of, if not the loosest song on the album. It's difficult to categorise and pinpoint the fabric of this song because the whole thing, barring a couple of short vocal sections, is one big long ad-lib. There are 5 songs on the album that are in excess of 6 minutes and 4 of them are in excess of 7. Each one has its own version of this thing that I'm talking about that adds another dimension to the LP, and they can be dreamy, to be completely honest. I wasn't lying. Maybe not in a usual sense. I get that some people might struggle to classify something so abrasive and graphic as dreamy, but they are hazy. The third song on the album, The Sprawl, has some of the best examples of the sort of dreaminess that I'm talking about. And Total Trash's extended instrumental bridge section is wild. I'm a fierce advocate for bands that do this, especially in this context where you can really push the listener to the limit of what they can enjoy and blur the line between music and just racket. It's fearless, and Sonic Youth are the kind of band that have really opened my eyes as to what appeals to me in music full stop, from a decade I didn't really think I'd ever expect it from. When talking about this very topic, you often hear people say the 80s was this decade-long party where everyone was having the time of their life and no one was ever sad and everybody got on with each other, and the 90s was like the hangover from it that nobody wanted. What I love about these 3 albums is they feel like the hangover has already started in some way. I have an even greater, more pronounced appreciation for these artists after having watched one of Brad Taste in Music's recent videos that showed every US Billboard #1 ever. And from around 1986-87 to, say, 92-93, it was a real struggle to push on and persevere, and if the #1s were a sign of everything else that was around it, I know which kind of bands I'd have been turning to and buying records of if I could find them and afford them. Over the last couple of years in my deep dive of the 80s music scene, albeit a precise area of that music scene, I've really discovered sounds that have struck a deep chord with me, and in the process I've ended up listening to some of the music that speaks to me the most, and I think will continue to do so for a very long time. The soul of it can be found somewhere in the DNA of these 3 albums. And I would hope after watching this, if you haven't already, you'll be interested in chancing one of these or maybe all of them, and from that travel back to a time where you can really admire relics from the past that deserve more love in this current age. Maybe you'll find something you didn't think you'd like and go through what I did. I really hope you do.
Put your hands together for The Cure.
Somewhere here I've got a list of dates. The Pixies are touring from the 27th.
Now here's Sonic Youth with their manager.
This has been A Simple Premise. Thank you, and good night.